to read the scriptures and read this stuff, but unless you have had these encounters, you can just easily read over these verses and they don't stand out at you. But if you've had these encounters, you'll know exactly what Job's talking about, waking up, seeing a shadow figure that's moving as a mist, and it doesn't have a form. It's just moving in the air, and it brings a message. And so very interesting stuff when we go back and read it in ancient culture and all of these things. If we want to talk about aliens or ghosts or demons, it's been throughout ancient civilization and cave paintings and ancient writings in the medieval times of UFOs. And that's the interesting thing, whenever the technology outdates, the people. So now if we see writings or pictures of a light in the sky, or it could be a satellite, it could be a jetliner, it could be advanced technology that we have. But for the people that were somewhat primitive, for them to be having these same encounters as well hundreds of years ago is when it brings something else to the table,
Well, let's go back to the Egyptians, and then before the Egyptians, I mean, even going back to the cavemen with the drawings on the walls and the caves, with drawing like spaceships and drawing men flying, like with a helmet on and weird stuff. I mean, things have happened and things are going to happen. And I guess if you have a negative mind, maybe even if it happened to you, you won't realize it. But if you keep a neutral mind, I mean, I've had things happen to me in my life I can't explain. I mentioned on my show here last week, I used to manage a business in Tacoma, and the building was built in the 1870s. And it originally had a hotel, and then the basement was a bar. And it was a bar from 1870s to, I guess, around 1830s when it closed. And then through the years, the building was revamped. Also, back in that time frame, the building was a hotel, and the upper floors were a brothel. And I managed that business, about 16 years, and I had a lot of employees during that time. And we carried our inventory in the basement. And I had my employees go down and naturally bring up inventory. And all these years, and it was a lot of different employees. They didn't know each other. I mean, one guy was a Navy SEAL that worked for me. I had a guy who was a ranger. I had a guy who served on submarines, people that are very reliable. And with so many of them would come up to me and say, something is going on in the basement. And I go, like what? And they say, well, I saw a shadow, or they smelled lilac like I did, or strange things, would move in front of them. I kind of, at the start, when I first started managing the business, I started thinking, well, this guy is a crackpot. But then I heard it from another person. I heard it from another person for years. Never had that experience. And one day I went down the basement to get something, and I was walking down there, and, I had two occasions, but this one occasion, I smelled lilac, and it got really cold. And I walked barefoot, and it went away. I backed up. I smelled lilac, and it got cold again. And I walked through it, and I go, wow, that's strange. If anything, I should have been smelling the sewer, because the basement actually went underneath the main road out there, because that's how old the building was. And I walked back the same area, and it wasn't, when I was done, it wasn't cold. I didn't smell anything. And then a while later, I went down there, weeks and weeks later, to get something. And then all of a sudden I was walking, and I felt like somebody took their fingers really hard and tapped my shoulders where it kind of hurt. And it really offended me. And I turned around because I hate to say it, I felt like I was going to swing at somebody. That's how bad it hurt. There was nobody there.
Wow.
Nobody. And it was no way, because I only had one employee working at that hour upstairs, and I was the only one down there. And I clearly could see in the basement, in the aisles, there was absolutely nobody there. So it's something that's when I started believing in the paranormal, that there's things out there that you can't explain.
It's interesting that you bring that to the table as far as, the whole smell of it. I've heard about people casting out demons out of people in different deliverance and exorcisms performed on people, and they will talk about smelling a really strong stench of garbage or vomit why like a demonic entity is leaving a person. So that's very interesting. You talk about the smell. I've even heard about people in churches and having this sweet aroma come through when they're in worship and they're in a worship service singing praises to God, and a sweet smell of honey or honeysuckles or flowers would come through, and it's this very pleasant smell. So I've experienced the exorcisms where you smell the really strong stench when people are actually going through that. That's really interesting.
Oh, yeah. And one other thing, too, like I mentioned on the show the other night, too, I used to be down there sometimes late at night working on stuff. And from the main sales floor, because they removed several floors of the building back in the 60s because it was not safe. But there was still the stairs left from the hotel to go up, up to the offices, which would have been actually 2 rooms at one point. I was there late at night, and all of a sudden I heard a bunch of footsteps going up the stairs, and I heard muffled talking. And I figured, hey, gee, maybe the bosses came in or something, right? So, I ran out of my office real quick and ran up to the stairs. There was absolutely nobody there. I also went back to the back door, and it was still double locked because I used to double lock it when I was there at night. Not a safe area. And to this day, I mean, when you hear footsteps going up a flight of stairs and you hear muffled talking, male and female, it's enough where I would absolutely, we closed at 6 o'clock at night. I tell you, I was right at that door at 6 o'clock ready to go home.
Yeah, I can imagine. And just to really, try to pinpoint what it is, I think a lot of people believe that, there's, maybe the people who lived before us have been through something traumatic, and it leaves an imprint that's just there almost on a loop of something that's traumatic that actually happened to someone. And there's a lot of cases where people have seen suicides, that are happening, or people jumping off of buildings and things like that. My wife went to New Orleans and went on a ghost tour. And seen something on a ghost tour in New Orleans, and she's seen somebody actually either falling off a building or jumping off or whatever. So it's almost like these loops that are created there with something of the energy changes for something that's so dramatic, and somebody maybe it creates a rip in this reality, and just like an impression there that's just plays over and over. There's everybody has something different to say about the phenomena, but there's, like I said, there's something there, and just to pinpoint it and to be an expert, I can pretend to be, but I'm not. And I think a lot of people who are pretending to be aren't either. They
right.
just kind of play one on TV. Essentially, really, there's so many ghost shows and things out there now, and people are just kind of building up to the hype and those things, but they really don't give a lot of concrete evidence and things like that. It doesn't do it justice,
Yeah, especially, I pretty much, when I hear somebody talk about a story, I can pretty much tell when it's not real, or, if it's real, just, by their tone of the voice. I mean, in a case like in mine, real quickly, after I ran into that problem, I started researching in the Tacoma newspaper, going back, to when that place was a speakeasy and, and a bar and all that stuff. And it was also right off where all the ships would come into Tacoma, Washington, right in the port. So a lot of sailors were there. It used it at one time. But then I started finding out there was a lot of people that died there. I mean, there was a couple major murders in the basement when it was a bar. A couple of women in the brothel got killed. So when I started, reading that, and then, it goes back to, if it was me it happened to, then I would start saying, hey. But, I mean, it was a lot of employees through those 16 years that would come back and say that things were going on. So, I mean, and they never even, a lot of these employees didn't even know the former employees. So, I mean, it's just, too much to be, where it's false.
Yeah, and I think that the atmosphere has a lot to do with it too. The type of things that you're entertaining. Obviously, if it was a brothel, there's all types of energy and maybe deception and things like that, and regret and heartache and things like that going on as well. When I try to look back at my childhood and see what targeted me or what could have been different to differentiate me from the kid next door, right? One thing about it, my mom and dad had a lot of parties, and they would have a lot of random strangers over. And I remember having conversation with random strangers, almost as a toddler, just a young kid, sitting at the table having a conversation with an old man, and who's drunk out of his mind, and we're talking about candy. I think we had some candy on the board, and I remember this man just falling straight back off the table, passing out, and they had to carry him out by his arms and legs, and all these different people who carried these different energies around in there. Whenever you're overly intoxicated like that, you become susceptible to spiritual influence as well. So all of these people being around, and then I'm from New Orleans, so it was kind of passed on in the family that they would burn candles, essentially doing candle magic, to put hexes on people or to get good luck, or if they had a job interview or something like that. So all of that stuff was practiced in my family as well. So you got to look at it, maybe after a party, everybody goes to bed. These could be these type of energies and spirits still lurking around in the house from these people. And, it's very, it makes you bring everything into perspective, especially if you have a kid,
Right.
I have a daughter, so, I try to look at the things I do. I go to bed, and things that I let into my home, and I'm the priest of my home, and we have to be protective over that stuff. And who's to say that something didn't linger off of somebody else who came into the house, and the parents are in the bed, and then here's a spirit off messing with the children in the middle of the night.
Well, the area you're from, wasn't there voodoo and all that? Yeah, that stuff. Have you ever ran across any of that type of stuff?
Some. We used to go to because I was into like Satanism for a while, and got into Wicca and witchcraft, and so we would go to Bourbon Street, and there was some shrines and stuff down there. There's some witchcraft shops and stuff that they would set up, and we'd go down there and get books and things. And so we were into it a little bit. I wasn't much into voodoo, but was more into the side of Satanism and witchcraft, which that, I guess that even by nature of trying to get into something like that. If you're coming into Satanism and not knowing much about it, only thing it's the opposite of Christ.
Right.
And that's kind of why it was assembled, to be a mockery of the church. And not that they acknowledge the church or give any validity, but they're creating something that's the polar opposite to what's already there with that hierarchy. And so that's out of the mouth of Anton LaVey. So I was into that, and into a lot of negative things. And so when I got into witchcraft and I got into that stuff, I started having a lot of encounters as well. I ended up opening up some doors in the spirit realm that I couldn't close, and ended up getting in over my head, and ended up getting really sick. I ended up being visited by some elemental spirits, and so very similar to those shadow beings that I seen when I was a kid. I ended up, we had somebody who was a warlock who was our teacher, and we would go and have parties at his house on like a Friday, Saturday night, and it'd just be all the teenagers in the neighborhood would be over there, and drinking and partying and stuff. But he was really big into the occult, and I would go over there. I would want him to teach me stuff, and so I'd stay up all night picking his brain about his experiences and his encounters, wanting to know that stuff was real. And I had somebody there to teach me. I ended up stealing something from the gentleman. After a couple of years, I stole some video games from him, and we was at a party at his house one night, and all of my stuff I stole from him was across the street, and it was in a duffel bag. And I stole some video games, and I had some other stuff that I stole from some friends. Because at this particular time, I was living in another state, and I was only in town for the weekend, so I ended up stealing from a bunch of friends. And while I was staying with the warlock, I stole a video game.
Uh-huh.
One of the friends went and found my bag in the closet and brought it over and had the video game that I stole from the warlock. So this guy walks in, and I see him holding the video game, and he shows it to the warlock. And they look at each other, all these people sitting in the living room, and there was just people everywhere. And there was a bunch of guys there who they were wearing all black, and I'd never met these guys before. They were some older gentlemen. They look at each other. I thought we were about to get jumped for stealing for them, because they were into gang involvement as well.
Uh-huh.
they all stand up one at a time and they walk to the back of the house. I didn't know if they were going to get a shotgun or baseball bats or what. So I looked at my cousin who was there with me at the time and I said, look, we got to go